Trees are an important part of painting a landscape. So today we're going to take a look at trunks and branches because they make up kind of the spine or the movement of a tree. So we'll look at different artists and see how they treat trunks and branches. Today we are taking a look at the trunks and branches of trees. And if you think of the tree as a figure, then the tree trunk is kind of like the spine of a figure. It's what suggests the movement or gesture of the tree. And we want to take a look at 6 different keys to kind of remember when you're painting a tree. And number 1 is tree trunks and branches gradually taper as they grow. And they look a lot stronger if you use more angular lines to the trunks and branches. Number 2 is tree trunks and branches have a gesture to them, a movement that makes them interesting, just like a figure does, a human figure does. And number 3, trees are generally a dark shape compared to the surrounding landscape, like the slanted plane or the flat plane. The tree trunks are generally a darker value. Number 4, value gradations give trunks and branches more depth. And 5, small branches work better if they're grouped in masses instead of individual branches. And number 6, trunks and branches are not brown. So don't pull out the burnt sienna every time you see a trunk. But they're more of a muted or gray color, but a definite color. So an example would be a really grayish violet or grayish blue or orange or red. A definite color, but very, very grayed, muted. So those are the 6 keys, and we have a lot of paintings here to look at. And then I have some of my own at the end. And this one is by John Carlson, and he wrote a really good book on landscape painting, which has a great chapter on trees. Would recommend getting that. Or if you have it, make sure you read it. Here he's got trees, and you can see that they do gradually taper. So it's the widest here and narrowest at the top, and then it's gradual in between. So you don't want a tree trunk that starts out here and then just gradually gets a little wider and then real thin. It's just not going to work. Now, you might find a tree like that once in a while, but it's more of an anomaly than something that's in nature. And if you paint it tapering all of a sudden, or getting wider in the middle and then tapering real quick, it's just going to look like a bad drawing. So I would not necessarily paint a tree that has that. Then also the idea of more angularity. Like you can see, the branches have definite change of direction with a different line as opposed to just rounding it off. Now he does have some rounded branches in there, but if you have a lot of more angular lines on the trunks, angular branches, it's just going to look stronger. And also the idea that tree trunks have definite gesture to them. This is a pencil drawing by Chauncey Ryder, and you can see it's almost like a figure standing there. You can almost have the shoulder, head here, hips going the other direction because he's got all the weight on one leg. So there's a definite gesture to the trunks. And that's what you want to capture. You have a tree trunk bending over this way, this tree trunk angling that way. And that creates a lot more interest, kind of movement that is really very beautiful. I think that's what sets up the landscape, is the movement and gesture of the trees. Now, of course, you have some trees like pine trees, especially here in Georgia, that are very straight. But even there's movement in the shapes of the branches and where some are left out or some are grouped together. So there's a lot of movement, and the tree trunk is kind of the key to showing that. Again, similar to a spine. Here you see again, this is a painting by Alexander Jacob, French painter, early 20th century. And you can see the gradual tapering and not a lot of movement, but a little bit. Nice, interesting movement in these branches here. And where the branches become many or a lot, the tiny branches, you see they're grouped together in a mass. And then the bigger branches hold it up. And that always works better than trying to paint too many. This is kind of in between. Some tiny branches, but not enough to group them together. It's a painting by John Folensby, using a lot of paint. And the tree trunks are thin, but again, you can see the angularity to the branches. It makes the tree look a lot stronger. And the fact that they're dark against everything else. Sky is a lighter value. The background trees are lighter because of the distance. The water's lighter because it's reflecting the sky. And they're even darker than the shadows on the ground. The ground plane is usually lighter, even in the shadows, than the tree trunks. So tree trunks can, for the most part, be your darkest value in the landscape. Again, that's not a rule that is always there. You can always place the darkest dark wherever you want to move the viewer's attention, but tree trunks are the darker value. As I say that, they're a lot lighter here. And it depends on the tree. Aspens, sycamores are always going to be lighter trunks, but generally speaking, the trunks are darker. And here again, you have movement. A lot of nice color variation here too. If we zoom in, it's got a lot of, this is Frederick Mulhaupt, by the way. A lot of nice color in here, some violets, muted yellow, muted green. So a lot of color variation. There's some nice blue. It's all held together with a muted gray color, probably more of the darker yellow holds it all together, and then adding some of the other colors to it, but basically more muted and grayed as opposed to real strong. It's another Chauncey Ryder. And again, the movement of the tree trunks, and very angular. It just makes them look stronger. The other thing, compositionally, you want to make sure your spacing between the tree trunks is varied. And here you can see all the variety of different distances between the tree trunks. If you get them lined up all the same distance apart, it's going to become more static. So always vary especially with straight trees, but always vary the distance between them. This is Edgar Payne, and he's got more of a muted red-violet tree trunk color. And again, varied spacing. They aren't all the same distance apart. That just creates a better composition. So another Edgar Payne, you can see the movement, the different directions of the tree trunks and branches. There's usually one main tree trunk when you have trees that kind of sprout out all over. Here's the main one here with little smaller branches and trunks coming out of the main trunk. Again, more angular and having a definite gesture to them. And you can design the gesture yourself. Creation gives us a definite shape of the tree, but don't hesitate to have it lean a different direction or move a different way just to create a more interesting composition. And looking at how other artists do that, how they simplify trees, use the movement to create more interest. Because trees do have a definite movement and shape to them. That is what I think draws us to it. This is another Carlson. You can see the angular movement here of the tree trunk. The branches are generally, you don't want them necessarily all the time coming out of the same place on either side. Have them, he's got two here, one here. Try and stay away from making them all come out. And it's easy to do without thinking about it, having the tree branches on either side coming out of the same spot. And it just looks kind of static and boring and more man-made. Now here it is thick here, probably thickest here because of the branches, but it does have a gradual tapering. And again, the color, a lot of muted color And Carlson used this, probably a bigger painting. He used palette knife to lay in the paint on there. The palette knife gives you more texture for the bark. These trees being cooler have more blue-green with a lot of other colors in them, greens and reds and oranges. Here they're warmer, probably a bit more black and red, burnt sienna, to get more of a warmer feel on this tree trunk, but a lot of color. Also, on this painting by Carlson, you can really see the gradual value change that creates more depth within the tree trunk. So this tree trunk is a dark tree trunk, darkest down here, then it gets lighter again, then it gets darker. So some value change really helps the three-dimensional look of the tree trunk, as opposed to just a flat dark, which would flatten the tree and make it look two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. Same thing here, a lot of value change within the tree trunk, because the tree trunks are too tall to be just one flat value. There has to be, because the shape and the movement kind of comes and goes. It's not perfectly straight up and down, so it's going to be different value here than here because the tree is leaning back, maybe catching a bit more ambient light from the sky. So there has to be a value change somewhere to show the movement in the tree. And Carlson is a great one to look at. Here's another one. And you can see the color, a lot of variation of color, and the value change, the subtle change in value as the tree trunk gradually tapers. Another thing that I think helps the solidity of the tree, if we look a little closer, maybe not as much on this one. Carlson does use a bit of outline, like right in here, not much anywhere else, but outline to just make the tree trunk look a bit more solid. Sometimes we can, as we're blocking in with a big brush, the edge gets a bit too lost and the shape doesn't look as solid. So a little bit of broken outline. I wouldn't want a solid, thick outline because that would flatten it, but you can see one here a little bit too. This is a painting by Gustav Rydberg. He's got a tree trunk here. Nice gesture in this big branch. And notice how angular that is. It's not just rounded off like a wet noodle. It has some strength to it. The more angular, I think, the stronger the branch is. Trunk also, because the trunk has to hold up that branch. And if it doesn't look strong, it's just not going to read well on the painting. Very angular. And the value change of the branch compared to the tree trunk helps the three-dimensional look of the tree because the branches are actually a different plane. They're more slanted. The tree trunk is more vertical. So it's going to be a different value than the branches. And that helps also in the solidity and kind of a three-dimensional feel to the tree. Here's one of Carlson's again. The darks here get really dark. I'm assuming it's the photograph of the painting, but there's no color there. It just goes blank. But I like the movement. Very nice movement of these trees. They're not all the same. A lot of counterbalancing. One tree goes one way, another one straightens up a bit the other way, and has a nice variety. And again, the spacing. It is very easy to get your trees all the same spacing between each other if you're not thinking about it. Then we look at the masses of the bare branches. Now there's some foliage in here, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the branches here, small branches. And he's designing the shape of those branches off of the bigger branches. And you can see it everywhere. They're massed together, broken up with sky holes. But you don't see individual branches, or if you do, you don't see many. It's more of this solid mass and shape. And look at what you're painting, but then make a better design. In other words, don't feel you're caught or stuck with exactly what's in front of you, because the goal isn't to paint the tree perfectly as you see it. The tree as you see it is the starting point, and you want to change the design if necessary to make a better composition or design. Talk more about the bare branches, because you can see here a lot better too. These individual branches become a mass. And they're a lot lighter than the tree trunks. mainly because a lot of the lighter sky is coming through those tiny branches and making them a lot lighter. Plus, the light from the sky will wrap around the small, even though this is a cloudy day, there's still ambient light that's fairly strong coming from the sky, and it wraps around the smaller branches, especially the real tiny ones, and makes them a lot lighter. There's another one of Carlson's. Again, small trees, but nice shape to them. They're not the same number of branches on each tree. They have a nice gesture or movement to them. That is really what the painting's all about, is the gesture of the trees. Now, a few of my paintings here, these are aspens. This is what I was talking about with the outline. A little bit of broken, slightly darker line kind of solidifies the tree trunk a little bit more. You can see it more on here. Sometimes I'll block the trees in darker, and then when I add in this case, the lighter value of the aspen, leaving some of the dark on the edge a little bit. Not a solid line, because that'll flatten the tree, but just makes it a bit stronger. But I'm using the idea of aspens, which kind of grow differently. They'll kind of meander a lot more, so they have nice movement to them. And the counterbalance, or the trees going one way and some going the other, makes for a nice variety of just shape and movement. Here's some cottonwoods, old ones that are kind of old and meandering. I really liked the movement here of all of them. They all go in different directions, nice shapes. Then with the foliage in there, the tree trunks and branches are just showing up once in a while. And I have to put them in such a way that they look like the foliage is in front. Then you're peeking through the foliage to see the sky holes and the tree trunk and branches inside. And it is something you have to think through. Otherwise, it's not going to work. A lot of times you'll be painting trees and foliage and realize all the tree trunks and branches are in front of the foliage. And you wonder what's holding up the foliage. So make sure tree trunks and branches can disappear once in a while so that they're holding up the foliage instead of something behind it. But the subtle value change, trees like this, the tree trunks and branches are the darkest value. So I will block them in with the dark value, maybe picking out not the darkest dark or not the lightest dark, but kind of a middle value dark right in there. And just get the silhouette of the movement of the tree trunks and branches with one value. It's a lot easier that way than to start seeing too much color and value change too soon. Then you kind of lose the movement. So I get the movement with the dark, with the shadow, then add the light. Then I'll go back into the shadow and add a darker dark, and then maybe a lighter light or a middle value light. So I end up with 4 values most of the time with the trunks and the branches. 2 in the dark and 2 in the light. And that's enough value change to make it look 3-dimensional, make it look rounded, but at the same time, not too busy. Now, I do have a lot of color change, oranges and violets and darker violets, some value change in there, some blue. And what I'm thinking here is the sun hitting the grass and bouncing up and creating some reflected light. And even if I don't see it, if there's a lot of sunlight on the ground, there's got to be some reflected light in there. So this is slightly lighter and a bit warmer. Then on top of the trunk that's facing the sky, that's a bit cooler because it's in the shadow, it's reflecting some of the blue sky. So a little bluer here and a little orangier there. Just add some variation of color. A little bit of reflected light there. It's a bit warmer. And the rest of it is cooler because it's in shadow. But trying to get some color variation in there, even some greens. A lot of blue and yellow bouncing around, so there's going to be some green in the tree trunk as well. This is one from Tubac, Arizona. A horse ranch there. It had a real nice garden. This was springtime, and capturing the movement here of this tree. It's got 3 main big branches off the trunk, or you could say this is the trunk and it has 2 main branches. So trying to set that up with those 3 main shapes, not trying to see too many branches or too much detail all at once, but seeing this as the main trunk and then the branch coming off here and the branch coming off there. Starting with that, setting that up with the simple dark and light value, then getting to the smaller branches. Here's more cottonwoods. This is in Sonoyta, Arizona, Sonoyta Creek. In autumn, but you can see the branches, the tree trunks, again, gradually tapering. I'm careful with these smaller branches. It's just too easy just to whip them in there without giving them much thought, but really think about the direction and how they're going to counterbalance each other. I'm always eliminating branches because I'm not going to paint every branch I see. So one main trunk, 4 or 5 big main branches, then I want to simplify the smaller branches coming off that. Again, they become more of a mass, kind of like foliage, these small, tiny branches. But they're also very light because most of the time they're against the sky, and that light filters through and really lightens up the value of those tiny branches. More cottonwoods. I really like cottonwoods. Done a lot of painting in Arizona and New Mexico, which is full of them. But again, starting more with this one value here and getting the shape and the gesture or movement of the tree first. Start with a simple value to get the silhouette of the tree or the gesture of the tree. Then go in and add all the reflected light, the different coloring, as long as the reflected light and the different colors don't cause you to lose the value. In other words, I've got a little bit of value change, some darker, some lighter, but they all stay within the shadow. There's kind of a medium dark, that's the most overall dark, and that's what I'm trying to use to hold everything together. So if I block the tree trunks in with this value, then when I add the lighter, it'll sink into that darker value and not jump out too much. Now the sunlight areas, of course, will jump out. I want them to, because that's a definite value change. But this value change is more subtle. And that gradual value change is really what makes the tree trunk look more refined. Here's more cottonwoods. Again, a lot of color variation. I do tend to see trees get darker as they go down. I mean, they're all dark. The whole tree trunk is dark, but the darkest is probably closer to the ground and or up underneath the foliage where less light is getting in. But then this area tends to be the lightest dark within the tree trunk. So you can see it gradually gets a little lighter, then starts to get a little darker again. And some color variation. You can see the reflected light here and a little reflected light there in there. Just adds more volume and shape and interest in the tree. But what really grabs your attention right off the bat is the big movement or gesture. So planning out these movements so they're not all going the same direction or have the same look or same shape, but a nice variety. But don't forget also to gradually taper, because nothing looks worse or looks more like an amateur painting than if your tree trunks or branches taper too fast or taper and then get wider again. Now they can get wider sometimes with these bigger branches because they build up more at the base, so it can look wider there. But still, there's a gradual tapering. And the value change, this has a lot of heavy bark on it and then some smoother, these are sycamores, smoother, lighter bark. So I do want a definite value change there. 2 values in the darker bark and then 1 or 2 in the lighter bark. And that's going to suggest the texture. The subtle value changes in there suggest more texture going on. Again, more I can keep things angular, the better. Some rounded off, but you can see these real, almost sharp, angular branches just look like they have more strength to them compared to branches that are more rounded. It's a smaller painting, also in Arizona, in the angular branches. A lot of color variation. Here I see the tree trunks as a violet, muted. So violet with a little yellow or yellow-orange. The dark violet is more just blue and alizarin with a little burnt sienna, which is violet with a reddish orange. So it stays muted, and it can go from slightly greener to a little more redder, more violet. A lot of color variation. And this is in the light area, so this is lighter, it's not shadow. But even in the shadow, you want a value change, a subtle value change from top to bottom. More cottonwoods, all pretty much dark. I like the contrast between the dark trunks and the light foliage, and just the variation of trunks leaning one way or the other. Another one here, this is from New Mexico. But here I see them, again, more as a violet or blue violet. A lot of color variation in them, going from bluish to reddish, some orange in there to warm up the violet. And it's not that I see those colors all the time or see a ton of color, exact color in the tree trunk, but I do see color variation. I do see that it's not the same color. So if I just decide on or make a decision what basic color it is, then I can scrub any colors into them as long as they're muted, just to show the variation. So the goal isn't to match the color, it's to capture the idea of a lot of varied colors. And I can do it with different colors. It doesn't have to be the exact same ones that are on the tree trunk. Lastly, here's more aspens. Again, there's a lot of them here, and I want to make sure I'm overlapping. So there's depth. Some of the trees going behind the other trees, varied shapes, a lot of different widths between the tree trunks, and trying to capture a gesture or movement that just looks interesting with angular lines on there. And you can see a little bit of the outline. It just strengthens the tree trunk a little bit. It does cause a little bit of flattening, but if I have enough value change within the tree trunk to show the roundness, then it generally helps with the making the tree look a bit more solid. And the most important thing about trees is just to practice them. I mean, you can watch videos and read about them endlessly, but until you just go out and do it, that's what really helps the most.